on Spice FM, online on spicefm.co.ke or Spice FM KE, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or on KTN Home, where we'll be live for the next 2 hours. As we begin the hour, City Muga has today's proverb.
Gold should be sold to the one who knows the value of it.
Gold should be sold to the one who knows the value of it.
Sounds simple and straightforward enough. But as I keep thinking of it, it isn't as simple and as straightforward as it sounds.
It isn't. Because you have to ask yourself, so what do they have in mind? These old men and women.
Well,
when they came up with this proverb.
Yes, a thing of value, that bit we understand. Yes. But like with most proverbs, questions will arise.
Yep.
And usually there are more questions than there are adequate responses.
And you will find context,
Yes.
I'm sure, with what you're discussing on a daily basis, what you're facing on a daily basis. Well, welcome to the show, the second hour of The Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. So let's talk about Kenya's imminent debt crisis. Kenya's debt has been rising since 2013 from 1.8 trillion shillings to 6.6 trillion shillings. This has led to high public debt repayments, which are squeezing out other public expenditure priorities, and the country is now forced to borrow to meet its recurring needs, with debt repayments almost outstripping revenue collection. We had this conversation last week as well, and we looked at it from the point of how much are we raising, how much are we paying in terms of debt. It's close to 1 trillion shillings. We are raising about 1.4 to 1.6. This year, of course, you expect to see a drop in the revenues collected by the country, but you're not going to see a drop in the repayments of debt. So are we facing a debt crisis? Are we going to get there at some point? Last week, when we looked at it from the angle of gender, and then what this debt crisis would then mean to gender and the vulnerable communities. And just because the government is now not left with enough money to finance its development projects, some of those that take a direct hit are the vulnerable communities. That brings in the gender issue as well. That brings in the persons with disabilities. That brings in children. So those are affected. What are these issues that we need to keep discussing and raising about debt all the time, and why does Kenya's debt issue become a conversation that appears to only be had by a section of the citizens, but not a collective of Kenyans, including the government?
It would appear that on one side, there's not an understanding of what really is going on when we talk about the country being in debt, and the citizens not really understanding how far down, or rather how deep down this rabbit hole the country actually is. So there's a part of understanding. On the other side of it, when it would be that the side who would have the control or would have the power is just then disinterested in making sure that things are running the way in which they should. So there's a disconnect between people having a comprehension of what is really going on when the entire country has essentially been mortgaged away, or not being interested in explaining to Kenyans, or at least saving the country from this imminent danger.
Well, what I sometimes wonder when I look at, or when I listen to the discussions around it, is people who lend money are referred to as banks, lending institutions. And the principles that they use in lending money, I believe, are the same as when one is seeking to actually be lent money by an institution as an individual. They do due diligence and they determine your ability to pay. So it's not as though they're giving us money, they lend us money because we have shown and we have clear indication that we are able to pay. So at what point then does this issue of debt become an issue? And do these people lend us money knowing that we cannot pay? Or do they lend us money knowing very well that we will default? Or have they done due diligence and know very well that we are able to pay? And if that is the case, then why and where is the danger?
You'd expect that some of those credit rating companies and organizations such as Moody's and the rest that give us, a very good score, they have looked at all those things. They have looked at your capacity. They have looked at your the mix of your economy. And many people have even said Kenya's economic mix is brilliant. It's lovely. We have agriculture, we've got tourism, we've got other, there's many sides that contribute, or many sectors that contribute to this economy. So even now, during the COVID-19 period, I've said agriculture was actually now the one that was holding the economy together. So when they look at us and they say, right, the capacity and the ability of this economy to be able to raise enough money to pay the amount of money that they're borrowing looks good enough. And then you get to a point where they're not looking at the capacity of the government to absorb, or maybe even the corruption levels, and saying, if we give them money, then it's most likely going to go into, it's only 7 billion shillings, and it's a bank guaranteed. So the dams will be built. No, we don't have that conversation maybe at that level. They're just looking at what's your capacity to borrow, and even if they mix with every other risk factor, they still say, you look good enough. You look creditworthy. So our creditworthiness is good, and that's why we're able to go ahead and borrow. But the issues that emerge, and that's what even Ndu you were raising, is about the transparency of this whole issue. How do Kenyans participate in this whole process in terms of just even knowledge? Yeah, when you talk about public participation as one of the pillars of good governance, even put in the constitution, is that being practiced? Does it come in at the level of this is how much we've borrowed, this is what we intend to do with this money, and this is the progress of the development program?
I mean, those questions are valid questions and they must be asked. But there is a hype about the danger that we are in with the monies that we have borrowed and the ceilings that the parliament keeps setting, raising it higher and higher, vis-a-vis what the Kenya Revenue Authorities are able to collect. Now, it appears that we collect money to pay debts. And the question one asks is this: is that the true picture? Is it that we collect money to pay debts, or is it that even our collection method should be brought into question to actually determine, are we actually collecting what we are able to collect? And then there's this other matter which keeps popping up. The budget items that we keep having to deal with, which clearly surpass what is collectible. You have this budget of X trillions, and you have Y trillions, which is evidence as what is being collected. So that disparity also forms a different aspect of the conversation. So really, what are we dealing with? Is it noise being made for the sake of noise, or are we actually in danger? Because if we do not pay our debts and we default, our credit rating will plummet. And then suddenly we'll have more problems than we thought we previously had.
Yeah. And the importance of raising that conversation is actually now asking ourselves those hard questions. Are we actually in any imminent danger? Or is it just a conversation that's just being pushed out there? And also, if we are indeed in that imminent danger, then what is it that we should do? If we are not in imminent danger, where are we? What's our situation? And this is the reason why the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, a platform committed towards working with all stakeholders to redress this imminent public debt crisis, was formed and brought together. Let's today speak with Wanjiru Gikonyo. Wanjiru is the national coordinator of the Institute for Social Accountability, and she joins us now on the line. Good morning, Wanjiru.
Morning, Eric. How are you?
Hey, it's been a minute.
It's been too long. I can see you people forgot me. You don't know my status vis-a-vis COVID.
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
Not possible
my
to
sister.
forget you.
You really must stop listening to these rumors that I think some malicious people are
I'm
saying.
trying
in
to
your
tell
direction.
you, it's a lie.
Investigations must be launched, CT.
We know very well
was
what
the-
your
who
COVID
was the
status is.
orchestrator?
We were even updated on what we call the Wanjiru Wealth Index. We were told. We were told, and in detail. So we have been keeping tabs on you.
You see now, you don't invite me. I miss all these goodies. I didn't know there's an index like this.
There is.
My sister, you need to lobby for me.
Don't
Whoever
worry.
has orchestrated my removal on fictitious and spurious and illegal grounds.
It has
must
it has
be
been
dealt with.
presented to the feet of the elders. Don't worry.
Good.
Hey. Okay. Are we now? Can we now make peace, Wanjiru?
Yeah, we must make peace. We are,
All right.
yes.
Welcome to the Situation Room this morning.
Asante sana.
It's good
Happy
to have
be
you.
here.
Tell us about the Okoa Uchumi Coalition. What are the objectives? What's the purpose of bringing together the organizations that form the Okoa Uchumi Coalition?
Thank you. And, thank you for the opportunity to share this. And Okoa Uchumi is a coalition of civil society organizations because we realized we are working around important national issues, in particular the issue of the national budget, national infrastructure, and debt. And, we have great institutions such as the IEA that had been doing a lot of work, IDP, working with the public to engage government, in the public participation process. So we realize as civil society, different groups are working across the sectors, looking at taxation, looking at the East Africa region, and we are making submissions as anticipated in the law, because the Constitution anticipates that sovereignty, of course, is vested in the people, and public finance shall be guided by principles of accountability, public participation, transparency. So we were doing our part. We've been doing our part. But we're not getting responsiveness. Our political leaders, the executive officers, the public officers, are not taking on board our submissions. And as a result of this disconnect, we then find a situation where we are in a debt crisis. In fact, it's not imminent. We are in a debt crisis. And this is agreed, even if you look at government's own documents. The Budget Review and Outlook paper published end of September says that we are at risk of debt distress. And we are actually now borrowing to pay debt, which is illegal. This is not supposed to be the case. So we got together to address the political question, because we said the law is there, the law is understood, yet our actors, from the Treasury to Treasury Executive, which is the presidency and all of that, to Parliament, have undermined the laid down procedures and put Kenya in an unsustainable position. And this was the case before COVID. And with the coming of COVID and the restrictions around COVID, we've then seen this issue escalate, so that businesses now are forced to close down. Unemployment has reached, the last official figure that we were given is 1.2 million Kenyans had lost their livelihoods. The figure is likely more, because we have a huge informal sector that's not easy to quantify. We also saw a report about a month back saying that in the last 6 months, Kenyans have borrowed 345 billion in online borrowing. So we are in major distress. We saw the fight over the sharing of revenue with the president saying there is no money. Of course, they eventually had to give 50 billion, but that is not even to be realized this financial year. So we then see services aren't being funded. People who had taken contractors, the pending bills issue. Pending bills is because government is not able to pay for services that have been rendered to it. So we are in a crisis. And we felt the reason is political. So let us get together as civil society and address the issue, the political issue.
Okay, so Wanjiru, based on all of that you said, I mean, now we're looking at Kenya's debt and borrowing policy, right? According to the measures that the World Bank has offered up, Kenya's debt is sustainable. So if according to these World Bank requirements, the debt of the country is sustainable, then why then would we say that Kenya is in a debt crisis if according to the global governing financial bodies, it's sustainable and it's something that can be worked out? Then why the crisis talk?
First of all, there's the technical aspects, and I think that's an excellent question, and Kenyans get confused because of what is said. In terms of the World Bank, the IMF, there are indicators that they use, and there's 4 measures. And Kenya was within those measures until 2018. It then defaulted on breached one of the measures, and the risk rating was then downgraded. In March of this year, again, we breached another. I think we breached 3 of them out of the 4. So, first of all, the credit rating, rating us now to high risk, as has happened, was because we breached the measures. the discussion on sustainability, I'll quote something a colleague said, James Muragori, when he said, is Kenya's debt sustainable? Yes, on one hand, it's sustainable because Kenyans are there's revenue being collected. There's up to 1.4 billion, even with the impact of COVID. Trillion, sorry.
Yes.
Even with the effects of COVID, Kenyans are doing their part. We are generating the revenue. However, when you look at what government is doing with the money we are raising, that is where the problem comes in. Like I said, when you have businesses that are shutting down because they delivered goods, government procured their services and didn't pay, and those businesses have taken loans and are not able to pay those loans, and businesses then go out of business. We are finding a rise in suicide rates. When you find government allocation to services, which is the bedrock of our society, is going down, because we've discussed this before. When you talk about the shareable revenue, how much is going into health? Kenya is supposed to be putting in 15% of the budget in health. We are presently at around 6%. So we are underinvesting in health. You talked about it, agriculture. This is where majority of Kenyans are employed. It's the main contributor to the GDP. And you find the investments in agriculture are going down. So when you talk about sustainability, there's the numbers, but then there's the reality on the ground. And I think you said this, the problem with the way the international financial institutions measure sustainability is looking at a set of numbers that don't deal with the political reality. And in our campaign, we've identified there's a conflict of interest, because on one hand, the institutions that are rating you are also the ones who are lending. And at the end of the day, once you lend, you have to pay. And you've seen with the debt relief conversation, Kenya is not able, or rather has been reluctant to pursue debt relief, because they say, well, we have a contract that doesn't allow us, a contract with an outside agency that doesn't allow us to deal with our local debt issue. So there's a conflict of interest that we intend to look at, and we need to be alive to. How can the raters, the people who are making recommendations to us, be the ones also lending us money? That's a conflict of interest. And I think Citi also said, what about the due diligence? And is this being done? And you will find instances where investments have come in and the due diligence wasn't done because of this conflict of interest, because the institution coming to do the due diligence stands to benefit from the amount that's going to be paid by Kenyans. So,
are we dealing here with a transparency issue? Are we saying that government dealings are not above board insofar as what ought to be known or what ought to be in the public domain is not in the public domain, and that even when an inquiry is made as to it, more information being made available, it isn't available? Is this the case? Is this what we're dealing with here, Wanjiru?
Yes and no. Government has availed a good amount of information through the regular budget process, through that regular reporting. There are details that are missing. And so it's yes, there's information out there, but no, not all the information that needs to be. The Budget Accounts Committee of the National Assembly in February sanctioned the CS of Treasury, because he said, look, you're not giving us adequate, up-to-date information. So, for instance, the debt register is not updated. There's supposed to be an annual report on debt. This report also not updated. So we don't have the report, for instance, from last year. We don't have also some of the details of the contracts that have the negotiation and also where the money is going. Some of these details are not there. So we have public participation. We have government reporting, but the devil is in the details, and there is a systematic withholding of crucial information. So, Citi, to answer your question, government is ticking the box, So that if you look at it on the face of it, the documents are there, but there's a transparency issue. In fact, the IMF in its country assessments of Kenya also noted there are accountability deficits.
Wanjiru, is there a threshold for transparency? Meaning, are there boxes we can tick when we're talking about transparency and say, okay, this is what we need to tick to actually meet that basic threshold for transparency?
I'm trying to think if there's an easy answer and if you want to go on thresholds. The question, yes. What you need is, the question is, do we have enough information at the various stages of the debt process? Number one, what is the reason for which debt is being procured? Number two, what is the cost of this debt? Number three, what is the purpose? At the spending stage, have we ring-fenced that money? And what we are saying is that at these crucial stages, we do not have the right information. So debt is procured for projects, but when you look at how those projects are arrived at, for instance, the SGR, for instance, medical equipment, that one already is fully in the public arena, fully canvassed. How was this project originated? What was the due diligence? That becomes the first problem. So when you're procuring debt for a non-productive investment, what is the accountability? So we are lacking accountability in the in the prioritization process. The Auditor General said we are budgeting for corruption. You put projects in the budget for the sole purpose of driving corruption. And actually, you can look at it that the SGR at the point it was procured in 2016 was 4.5% of the GDP in terms of the size. Now, the World Bank says that countries should spend about 4.5% of their GDP on infrastructure to spur growth. And they say this is a good level of expenditure that can spur growth and sustainable infrastructure. Now, in 2016, Kenya procured one
infrastructure project.
One infrastructure project. And when you look at that infrastructure project, there was no due diligence done. Though it was parachuted into the budget, it was then scaled up. From the original estimated cost, it was, the final cost was about 4 times the original estimate. So to answer Siti's question, at all these stages, the conversation about SGR was there, but the crucial details were not in the public domain. And more critically, these details are not with Parliament. And Parliament asks for them, or sometimes doesn't ask for them, but they still endorse and pass the resolutions. So would I say access to information is a problem? Yes, it is. But the bigger problem we have is that we've got a very strong Parliament in terms of the powers given in the Constitution. It hasn't exercised those powers to say no, to stop executive projects that are political in nature, that are driving corruption. And unfortunately, our huge budget growth, because we've had a very huge budget growth, about, I think we were saying, is it 2.5 or 3 times since 2013, is not being driven by services. It's not being driven by let's put more money in agriculture. We are spending 2-3%. We are supposed to be spending 10%. We are not putting more into health. We are spending 6%. We should be spending 15%. Spending on education has been going up because of the very strong union. Unfortunately, these large infrastructure projects are what have ballooned our budget. So our expenditure, our borrowing and expenditure have gone towards these large infrastructure projects, bringing then the next question, what is the return
on that
because
investment.
maybe we
So what is the return on all this investment that we've made in terms of borrowing, in terms of how much our budget has even ballooned since 2013, just in a couple of 8 years, from 1 point something trillion shillings to 3 trillion shillings. This is a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation on Spice FM, on KTN Home and online. We are speaking with Wanjiru Gikonyo. She is the national coordinator for the Institute for Social Accountability, talking about Kenya's debt chokehold, where we are at, and what we ought to do about it. From all these that we invest in, what would your answer be to that?
in fact, it's just that I don't have the figures, because the World Bank, for instance, has a report where they evaluated, they were looking at fiscal consolidation in a time of COVID. And, they listed the various infrastructure projects and, many of which have stalled. So on one hand, there's a whole raft number of projects that have been initiated that have stalled. The Auditor General also is on the record around many of the large infrastructure projects that are riddled with corruption, and also questioning the cost efficiency and productivity. So whether it's looking at money that was spent on the dams, looking at the medical equipment, looking at things like even the last mile connection. So really we have a problem in this country. And I remember the World Bank did an excellent report around 2014, when they were looking at what happens with devolution. What are the potentialities? And part of what they pointed at is Kenya is extremely inefficient. So, and you saw this play out around the LAPSET, where we had investors pulling out because they said the cost of compensating people for building the pipeline was totally exaggerated, exorbitant, extortion. You've also seen with the SGR, Ethiopia built an SGR with the specifications of ours. I mean, theirs is actually electrified. Ours is not. Ours runs on diesel. Theirs is twice as long, and we paid the same amount of money. So there are these inefficiencies, but really it's corruption, and it's budgeted corruption that has riddled Kenya and has come to play. So that is one aspect. The other aspect that is undermining, the productivity is the motivation for the projects. So there's corruption in terms of the costing, but there's also corruption in terms of the type of initiative. And if we look at, for instance, the electrification, last mile connection, excellent idea. But however, there is a national plan that had identified the problem of last mile was that it was too expensive to connect these homes. So the issue was the cost structure of the sector, the energy sector. And of course, that there is corruption in that. And there's a campaign that's run by Jerotich Sei around opening up who are the beneficiaries of this very expensive electricity that is crippling Kenya's economic growth. So this is what had been identified. But then came along this Power Africa project. Actually, it was under our favorite U.S. President Obama's administration, where they then negotiate with government and they fund the last mile, and they put in money, but they bypass the official report and the laid out plan. And so they go and put in money, and last mile then didn't work because the motivation for taking the money is that the money was available. So we are seeing there's this very unhealthy relationship between international financial institutions and sovereign states, where debt is being procured for projects that are not in the national plan because the money is readily available, especially for the commercial kind of lending. And unfortunately, a lot of support to African countries is coming in the form of commercial lending. So you've seen in countries like the US, and we are seeing other countries setting up their own commercial lending arms. So there's a report we did, an assessment that was prepared for us, and the consultant told us we have a race to the bottom. Whereas there are Paris principles that are supposed to protect the relationship between IFIs and make them responsible. So international financial institutions should be responsible in the kind of debt they make available. These rules are not being complied to. China has come in, and countries are posturing for global significance, and so there's a lot of money coming into African countries, and we're not the only ones. Actually, Kenya is not the only one in this crisis. Zambia, Ethiopia, even Ghana, with the onset of COVID. So what we are seeing driving this is, for us, we've looked at the situation and said there's a lack of accountability by IFIs to the people of Kenya. So our sovereignty is being undermined by institutions that then set conditions that then affect us. So IMF standard conditions are taxes. Taxes standard is go for indirect taxes, VATs, tax the informal sector that don't have the clout to push back, turnover tax.
Yeah.
So this breach. So
as all this is happening, Wanjiru, where is the public, and in terms of public participation? So we know we give ourselves this constitution that gives us the power to participate, especially in the budget making process. You've even actually on this show, you've told us how you've championed public participation in budget making process. Where is the public participation in this, in the making of the budget, in the approval of the loans, and even knowing how much money has been borrowed, how much of it goes into the budget, and how much of it is being appropriated to the various functions?
Very good question. And there is no budget participation at that point of loan contracting. In fact, there's no participation also by counties. So there's no intergovernmental conversations around that. And Parliament's role has been inadequate. So actually this has been a very closed space where even the oversight institutions like the Controller of Budget and Auditor General argue or complain that they are not able to get access to information. So one of the main things of this campaign is we need to open up that. We are saying, look, procurement of debt is part of the public finance management process. It should be subject to the articles of the Constitution, and it should respect the sovereignty of the country, of Kenyans. So we need to open that up. And we are a bit concerned. There's a debt policy that was enacted some 2-3 months ago. We participated in this process and gave submissions. But when we saw the final copy, we see, a Treasury, a government really that's saying they didn't take up our submissions in terms of how to open up this space. So we really see a government, and, a colleague made this comment. If you look at the conversations around Eurobond, and Eurobond was 2013, 2014, where the government, the CS, was unable to explain where the money went. And, Eurobond was commercial borrowing. Commercial borrowing does not have the same kind of accountability requirements as borrowing from the IMF or the World Bank. And government took this money and went to town with it. They couldn't account where it went. But then you come to COVID. All these many years, some 5-6 years later, same thing recurs. So the Auditor General actually makes this observation because they did an audit of the COVID, the first phase of COVID spending, and they say, have we not learned anything? And so this is why we say, as a campaign, we are looking at the issue of political accountability, because the problem is answerability. It is not the law, it is not the numbers, and the Treasury is fudging some of the numbers and giving inconsistent figures, across the board, and that in itself is actionable. So the issue is accountability, and as we engage, our aim is to open up the dialogue. Our aim is also, of course, we want to push for this balanced budget, which is more the traditional work we do, which is looking at the budget making process and the looking at the policy framework. But the third thing we want to do is talk accountability. Who is going to answer? And how do we ensure that those responsible answer? And so that we can stem this tide of political officers running amok with our resources, because they are very comfortable
can Kenyans
that
be
we will pay.
involved in this, Wanjiru? Because or do we say that there will be some kind of representation by a select group of people, such as civil society or core Uchumi, like you're talking about now, that would represent the greater population of Kenyans? We look at other countries where public participation, it goes without saying. People are involved in the naming of a road, for example, something as basic as that. And people are heavily vested in how that process plays out. How do we get to that point on the continent, here in Kenya specifically? How then can people actually be involved in this, or must there be representation for the greater population of Kenyans?
That question has several answers. On one hand, as the coalition, we want to raise the awareness, we want to open the space, and we want to bring citizens with us. So we want to work with citizens to open up the space. That's what we want to do as a coalition, because we are saying that the public participation processes that are taking place are tokenistic, and they're not responding to the real needs of Kenyans, and they're undermining our sovereignty. I think the other question you ask is, what is the representation of citizens? And you are exactly right. Parliament has failed to represent citizens, to represent the country, to execute its mandate on the issue of debt accountability. Parliament has been pocketed by the executive. If you look at the reports, actually, you'll find Parliament very good statements. So Parliament will say, no, this information isn't there. This is very questionable. So they posture, they raise the questions, but then they go ahead and approve. So the problem is you have this unhealthy relationship between the executive and Parliament, which is why, as a coalition, we haven't yet discussed the issue of the BBI. But, from an institutional point of view and from a personal point of view, I'm very concerned when you look at expanding the powers of the president in a situation where we have actually had an undermining of oversight. And I'll read a quote because we've talked about the issue of state capture on this program before. And Wachira Maina in the AFRICOG report says, the difficulty in fighting corruption lies in the union of corruption and politics. State institutions and processes are repurposed to guard state resources for electioneering to maintain power. Oversight institutions must be eviscerated and hollowed out. So when you talk about state capture, it is that you have the laws, you have the constitution, you have the processes, we are going through the motions. But behind the scenes, you have an alternative. You have the hidden state or the deep state. And that is the one that is driving decisions that then blow up your budget, take all your revenue towards debt repayment, and drive heavy taxation. So the problem we have of growing taxation, now you're looking at how do you institute? During the time of COVID, you're instituting new taxes.
It's actually a good... on that note, Wanjiru, I like what you're saying. Let me just ask this, because that narrative receives a welcome hearing from me. But beyond talking about it, is there anything else the coalition hopes to do to ensure that the message not just resonates within the people within the coalition, but that the country actually gets to appreciate what it is that the coalition is trying to do?
Okay, good one. Like I said, we have a coalition of different institutions, and some of the institutions who are within the coalition have very strong networks at the local level. So whereas now we've started out with a national level launch where we are stating our, really our objectives and kind of just bringing out the message on forums such as this, our next stage is then to go to the local level and make sure that there are conversations with the citizens and to bring citizen voice into the national dialogue. But also, beyond bringing citizens into the national dialogue, it's to ask citizens, to explore our options. Because, we're in a bit of a situation like, the just ended American elections, where you have an executive authority who is violating the law willy-nilly. An executive authority is such that what do you do? So when you have the office of the president, you have the treasury, you've got parliament, all of whom are violating the law, then as citizens, you say, so what do we do? So that is the question we need to ask ourselves. What do we do? How far do we go to push for accountability? But the first step we have is we're going to do the sensitization and the dialogue and open up the conversation between citizens and the IFIs, between citizens and the treasury, between citizens and these institutions. So in my view, we haven't discussed it yet as a coalition, but I believe we will take, we always say when you're looking at social accountability processes, you have to, and even in legal processes, you have to follow the due procedure. So our due procedure first is we state this. We then have the dialogues. We use our usual means, which is legislative or court means. If it needs to get to civil disobedience beyond that, then we'll look at that because we definitely have to think about how do we get political accountability. Linking to the issue of elections, and we haven't gone that far as a coalition. We are focused on the issue of debt. There is no doubt that the problem of debt is linked to our political decisions, and like we said in this relationship between politics and corruption. So yes, we'll be looking at the BBI proposals to ensure they don't undermine separation of powers and accountability, but rather enhance it. But I think the last point is when we look at what happened in America, because the response of citizens is something we need to take on board. How emboldened they were, how they did the local organizing, how, local citizens, media groups, civil society, everybody got involved. So we have to fight for our democracy, guys. I think we're telling people we can't keep waiting for our, and we've said it before, our violators to come and save us. It's not going to happen. So we need to fight for our democracy and we need to occupy our spaces. So this is our first step. And so we would like to enlist Spice FM and this team. Please join this campaign through using this platform or your other platforms. We're looking for opportunities to discuss, but we must. And some of the proposals that we have, apart from opening the space for dialogue, because we do want, we intend to convene dialogue forums, stakeholder forums. And so when you hear about these forums, please help us publicize them. For those out there, please come to them. Please log on, get your voice heard. We intend to contribute constructively into the debt relief, debt restructuring process. And so we are asking for accountability around that. Yeah. We are asking for a curb of non-essential spending. And to our mind, it's not the time to borrow for new infrastructure projects, which has happened during the COVID time. As people's businesses are flailing, people are losing, have lost their livelihoods, government continues to borrow. And it's very sinister because government has this argument where they say, well, debt is sustainable, so they can continue borrowing. And they say, well, we are borrowing to stimulate growth. But when you build roads, you do not stimulate growth in the short term. Right now, we need investment in sectors where a lot of people are employed, and those benefits will accrue immediately. So in terms of prioritization and what is non-essential and what is essential, that is really the elephant in the room, and we'd like to get into that. And of course, pushing for transparency, pushing for accountability of IFIs vis-a-vis the people. So there's a lot on the table, but I think
you've got your work cut out for you, basically, Wanjiru. And I think it's a very good initiative that you've started here and bringing together the various organizations that have come together And yes, the call that you've just made for others also to join, others to participate, is a good call. It's about participating in the development and the welfare of the country. It's not about the politics of it. You know, there are people who may just look at it and think, these are civil society organizations, they're against the Jubilee government. No, it's about the welfare of the country. And if there are questions that can be asked, questions that can, receive answers, and when they don't receive answers, then you have to know exactly why you're not getting the answers that you deserve. We ought to participate in this. We'll be having a conversation about Zambia later on in the 9 o'clock hour with business journalist Ramanyang from Bloomberg and CGTN. And he's covered the story of Zambia and where Zambia has gotten to a point where they are basically requesting to be given some reprieve because they're unable to submit a payment that they were due to submit a payment. This is a situation that we must avoid at all costs as a country. And indeed, Wanjiru, we thank you very much for this initiative and congratulations, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Wanjiru.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Have a good one.
You too. Have a
Okay.
good day.